I learned to measure time in flour dust the year my husband died. 3 in the morning was my favorite hour the world silent, my kitchen lit by a single lamp, and flour suspended in the air like snow that would never settle on actual problems. I'd been a widow for 2 years. 730 days of holding everything together with my grandmother's rolling pin in hands that never stopped shaking. The shaking wasn't fear. It was cold and exhaustion and the arithmetic that never quite balanced no matter how many times I recalculated. Rent due in 12 days, flour bill 3 weeks overdue, coal running dangerously low. My hands cramped around the rolling pin as I worked dough for the 100th cookie of the night. Each one a small, perfect lie about who I thought I needed to be. Thomas used to say I worried too much about money. Easy to say when you weren't the one counting coins in the dark. When your dreams weren't addition problems that never solved correctly. He'd died 2 years ago with big plans and bigger debts. His expansion dreams had drowned us both, except I was the one left breathing underwater, trying to pay for visions that were never mine. I'd stopped thinking of myself as a widow and started thinking of myself as a debtor. Grief was a luxury. Numbers were real. The wealthy families who ordered my cookies admired what they called my artistry. The banker's wife wanted 12 dozen angels with hand-detailed wings. The mine owner's daughter needed elaborate cookies for her Christmas Eve engagement party. The church wanted nativity scenes painted with edible gold, premium prices for premium work. I'd trade every decorated angel for a single warm meal I didn't have to justify buying. But the orders were coming. The arithmetic almost worked. Almost. Coffee helped. I drank it black because sugar cost money, and money meant survival. The bitterness kept me awake, kept me working, kept me moving through hours that blurred into each other like flour and water. I'd forgotten what sleep felt like beyond those stolen 3-hour collapses that left me more tired than rested. Samuel brought my flour on Tuesdays. The merchant who ran the general store and somehow never demanded immediate payment for the 50-pound sacks I needed weekly. I noticed his kindness the way you notice weather from behind glass distantly, without letting it touch you. He'd been widowed 3 years. We were both fluent in the language of loss, but I couldn't afford conversation. Connection required energy I didn't have. The knock came at dawn. My landlord, Mr. Harrison, standing in the doorway with that particular expression landlords wear when they're about to ruin your day. Rent by Christmas morning, Mrs. Baker, or I'll need the keys. 12 days. I recalculated frantically as he walked away. The numbers almost worked if I slept 3 hours a night instead of 4. If every order paid on time, if nothing went wrong. They almost did. Almost. I returned to my rolling pin, to the flour dust that hung in lamplight like suspended hope. My grandmother had taught me to bake when I was 6 years old, her hands guiding mine through the motion of folding butter into dough. Baking is love made visible, she'd said. I wondered when it had become survival made desperate instead. The cookies were perfect. I'd learned perfection because perfection commanded premium prices. Each angel had wings detailed enough to count feathers. Each nativity scene told a story. Hours of work in every dozen. The wealthy families would serve them at their parties. Their guests would admire them briefly. And by New Year's, they'd be forgotten. But they'd keep me alive another month. That was the arithmetic I understood. Survival measured in cookies sold, in rent delayed, in the slowly shrinking distance between today and the day I might finally breathe without calculating. Outside my window, the first light touched the mountains. Christmas was 12 days away. I had 300 cookies to bake, deliver, and collect payment for. The numbers almost worked. I picked up my rolling pin and started again. Samuel arrived at noon carrying 50 pounds of flour I didn't quite have money for yet. He'd done this before, letting payment slide without comment, without judgment, without making me feel the shame that lived in my chest like a second heartbeat. I appreciated it the way you appreciate sunrise. Beautiful. Necessary. Too constant to mention. When did you last sleep? Abigail. The question caught me mid-measure. I looked up from the dough I'd been working since his last visit. Aware suddenly of how I must appear flower in my hair, shadows under my eyes, hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone past exhaustion. I sleep enough. I turned back to the dough, kneading harder than necessary. I've secured wonderful orders this year. The banker's wife wants 12 dozen angels, detailed wings, specific colors. And the mine owner's daughter needs cookies for her engagement party, 200 pieces. All themed around weddings and romance. I heard myself performing competence I didn't quite feel. My voice animated, gesturing with flour-dusted hands toward the orders written on paper tacked to my wall. See, I wanted to say, I'm managing. I'm fine. Don't look too closely. Samuel set the flour sack down gently. He was a tall man, quiet, with eyes that noticed too much. 3 years since his wife died in childbirth. 3 years of running the mercantile alone, ordering supplies, managing inventory. Living in the silence that follows loss. We'd exchanged maybe 100 words in 2 years. Enough to conduct business. Not enough to touch the grief we both carried. You're serving a lot of wealthy families. He said, they pay well. I measured flour into my bowl with practiced precision. The church order alone will cover half my rent. What about the families in the poor district? The question made me pause. I glanced at him, confused. What about them? Do they get to taste your baking? Something in his voice, not judgment. Just curiosity made my defenses rise. They can't afford what I charge. Samuel, I'm not running a charity. I'm trying to survive. He nodded slowly, didn't argue. Just said something. I was too tired to fully hear. Sometimes, the people who can afford to pay aren't the people who most need to be served. I let the word slide past me. Philosophy was another luxury I couldn't afford. The wealthy families had money. I needed money. The arithmetic was simple, even if nothing else was. Samuel had kind eyes. I'd noticed that before. The same way I noticed the weather distantly, from behind glass, without letting it touch me. He was a good man, patient, understanding. The kind of man who brought flour on credit and never made you feel small for needing it. But I couldn't afford to notice kindness. Couldn't afford to need anyone or accept help that felt like debt. Every moment lost to vulnerability was money unearned, rent unpaid, survival threatened. Pay whenever you can, he said, heading toward the door. I'll have it by Christmas. My voice came out sharper than intended. I always pay. I know. He paused at the threshold. That's not what worries me. He left before I could ask what he meant. I stood in my kitchen with 50 pounds of flour I'd pay for somehow, with orders that would save me if nothing went wrong, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and a rolling pin that felt heavier each day. I'd been alone 2 years. He'd been alone 3. We were both surviving in our separate silences. I told myself that was enough, that survival was enough, that I didn't need anything more than making it to the next day, the next week, the next month. I returned to my dough, measured, mixed, calculated. The numbers almost worked. They had to work. They almost did, 3 days before Christmas. Something miraculous happened. I was ahead of schedule. Every cookie was perfect. 300 small, edible masterpieces lined my kitchen angels with wings detailed enough to count feathers. Nativity scenes, painted with careful reverence. Stars and snowflakes that sparkled with edible silver. I'd slept maybe 4 hours in 2 days, but the exhaustion felt different this time. Lighter. Like suffering that might actually mean something. The arithmetic finally worked. Samuel brought extra coal that afternoon, unasked. I heard him outside my door, the sound of wood and coal being stacked. And when I opened it, he was already walking away. Samuel. He turned back. Thought you might need it. Cold week ahead? I should have argued, should have calculated the cost, and insisted on paying immediately. But the cold had been creeping into my bones for weeks. And the coal meant I could keep working without my hands going numb. Meant I could finish the last orders without shivering. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded and came inside to help me organize the finished cookies into delivery boxes. We worked in comfortable silence, his large hands careful with my fragile creations. He handled each cookie like it mattered, like the hours I'd spent decorating them were visible in his touch. I let myself notice how his presence didn't grate anymore. When had that changed? When had the silence between us shifted from awkward to easy? "Have you kept any for yourself?" he asked. The question made me laugh, short and sharp. "Everything's spoken for, Samuel. Every cookie represents money I desperately need." He looked sad for a moment. Actually sad, not pitying. There was a difference. Pity made me defensive. His sadness just sat there between us, honest and undemanding. "You should taste something you create," he said. "Maybe next year." The words hung in the air. Next year? Like I was already confident there would be one. Like I'd survived this Christmas and could imagine surviving another. I let myself imagine it, just for a moment. Paying rent in advance instead of scrambling at deadlines. Buying flour before I ran out. Maybe even teaching other widowed women these skills. Showing them how to fold butter into dough. How to transform simple ingredients into something beautiful. I'd forgotten what hope felt like. It made my chest ache more than despair ever had. That evening, I baked the final nativity set, finishing at midnight. 300 perfect cookies boxed and labeled. Tomorrow, I'd deliver them. Collect payment, and save myself. For the first time in 2 years, the numbers added up exactly. Samuel's hands had been steady organizing the boxes. Thomas's hands had always moved too fast, always reaching for the next thing, the next expansion, the next big idea. I pushed the comparison away. Wasn't fair to either man, wasn't fair to me. I slept for 3 hours, dreaming of arithmetic that finally solved correctly. The smell of smoke on the wind didn't wake me. The wealthy district was across town, and their problems, for once, weren't mine. When I woke on Christmas Eve morning, I believed this was the day everything changed. I was right, just not the way I imagined. The pounding on my door came before dawn, violent, urgent. The kind of knocking that meant something had gone terribly wrong. Samuel stood there covered in ash, words coming too fast. Fire, wealthy district. Half of Quality Hill burned last night. I stared at him, not understanding. What? The banker's mansion, the mine owner's house, at least a dozen homes. No one died, but he stopped, seeing my face. Your orders, Abigail. They're canceling. The world tilted. I spent the morning answering my door, accepting cancellation notes one after another. Polite regrets written on expensive paper. The banker's wife so sorry, but with the house damaged, they couldn't possibly host Christmas. The mine owner's daughter devastated, but the engagement party was postponed indefinitely. The church apologetic, but their wealthiest donors had just lost their homes and priorities had shifted. Each note landed like a small death. I accepted them with a face growing steadily more numb, thanking people for their consideration, understanding completely. Of course, these things happen. By noon, every order was canceled. Every single one. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by 300 perfect cookies and arithmetic that had suddenly, catastrophically, stopped working. Rent due in 2 days, zero money coming. The cookies would go stale before I could sell enough individually. Even if I worked around the clock visiting every possible buyer, I'd never move 300 elaborate Christmas cookies 2 days before the holiday. I kept picking up cookies and setting them down. Perfect, useless. Like being fluent in a language no one spoke anymore. Samuel appeared in my doorway. "I can take 50 dozen. Give them to customers at the mercantile." "At what price?" Samuel. Silence? That's what I thought. I turned away. I don't need charity. It's not. It is. My voice came out brittle, sharp. "Please go." He left quietly. I stood alone with my beautiful catastrophe and tried to remember how to breathe. 2 years. 730 days of holding everything together, working until my hands bled. Sleeping 3 hours a night, calculating and recalculating, surviving. And it ended like this, not because I'd failed, not because my work wasn't good enough, but because of smoke I'd never even seen. Maybe this was karma. Thomas's debts crushing me the way his failures crushed our dreams. Full circle, poetic, devastating. I spent the afternoon trying everything. Visited the hotel they already had their Christmas desserts. Knocked on boarding houses, no budget for luxury items. Offered discounts at the train station, travelers smiled politely and kept walking. By evening, I returned home with every cookie still unsold. The eviction notice sat on my table. Tomorrow I'd have no home, no kitchen, no way to bake myself back from this edge. The cookies mocked me with their perfection. Hours of work in each one, days of sleep sacrificed. Every detail exact because I'd learned that perfection commanded premium prices. But perfection nobody wanted was just expensive failure. I locked my door and sat in the growing darkness. Didn't light the lamp. Couldn't bear to see the cookies watching me like 300 small witnesses to how completely I'd miscalculated everything. My grandmother used to say, "The Lord closes all the doors so you'll finally notice the window." I'd found that comforting once. Now it felt cruel. What window? Where I couldn't see anything except the walls closing in. 2 years of surviving, and this was the end. Beautiful cookies nobody wanted. Perfect work that meant nothing. The arithmetic finally. Fatally wrong. I didn't cry. The grief was too big for tears. Christmas Eve morning arrived without sleep. I'd sat in my dark kitchen all night, surrounded by cookies that smelled of butter and sugar and my own desperation. The eviction notice stared at me from the table. Tomorrow. Christmas morning. The day I'd have no home, no kitchen, no way to bake myself back from this. I picked up an angel cookie, studying it in the dim light. The wings were perfect. Hours of work in this single piece. I'd painted each feather individually, mixing colors until they caught the light exactly right. Some child in the poor district would marvel at this, would hold it carefully, would remember it for years. The thought arrived unbidden, unwanted. I set the cookie down and picked up another. A star. Perfect points. Edible silver that sparkled. Another child's treasure. Another memory they'd carry. Something cracked in my chest. I'd been so focused on surviving that I'd forgotten why Thomas and I started baking. We'd loved feeding people, not serving wealthy clients who'd forget the cookies by New Year's, but actually feeding people, watching faces light up when they tasted something we'd made. That had been the point once, before debt and death and desperation taught me different arithmetic. The children in the poor district, I walked past them every week on my way to the mercantile. Looked through them the way you look through weather. They were somebody's problem. Everybody's problem. Never mind. I had my own problems. But they were children. And these were perfect cookies. And tomorrow I'd have nothing anyway. A key turned in my lock. Samuel. I'd given him one for flower deliveries and forgotten to ask for it back. He found me crying over cookies, tears landing on the table in small, dark spots. He didn't speak, just pulled out a chair and sat beside me. Two widowed people who understood that some griefs have no comfort. We sat in silence as morning light crept through my window, making the cookies glow like small, edible suns. I keep thinking about the children in the poor district. I finally said, my voice sounded strange. Raw? These cookies are perfect. Someone should enjoy them. Samuel nodded. Didn't tell me it would be fine. Didn't offer to save me. Just sat there, solid and quiet, while I spiraled through everything I'd lost and everything I'd forgotten. When had I started measuring success by survival instead of by joy? When had I forgotten that Thomas and I started this because we loved watching people taste something beautiful somewhere and fighting his debts? I'd lost that, lost him, lost myself. Someone should have them, I said again. Yes, just that. Yes. Not telling me what to do, not offering to fix it, just agreeing that perfect things shouldn't go to waste. We sat together as morning became afternoon. The light shifted. Something in me shifted too. I thought about the widow with 4 children I'd seen last week, wearing a coat too thin for winter. The orphans at the church who'd never tasted butter. The families living in converted storage rooms where Christmas meant survival, not celebration. If I was losing everything anyway, at least these cookies could mean something to someone. Samuel's silence wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. The way grief recognizes grief. The way widows speak without words. His wife had died 3 years ago, and he'd been alone ever since. Maybe we'd both been alone too long. Maybe that was part of the problem. All this surviving we were doing separately when connection might hurt. Less than isolation. Thomas would have understood this, I said quietly. The man I married, not the man who drowned in debt. The man who used to slip extra rolls to hungry children when he thought I wasn't watching. I'd lost him twice once to death. Once to forgetting who he was. Samuel's hand found mine on the table. Warm, steady, real, I think, he said slowly. You just remembered. Christmas morning. I made a decision alone. I woke before dawn with clarity I hadn't felt in 2 years. Loaded every cookie into baskets, 300 cookies I'd needed to save myself. But if I couldn't sell them, if I was losing my home anyway, then at least hungry children would taste something beautiful. This was the first thing in 2 years that felt like a choice instead of survival. The streets were empty and cold. My arms ached carrying baskets heavier than expected. I didn't stop. Each step toward the poor district felt like walking toward something instead of running from everything. The difference mattered. The first gift changed me. A widow with 4 children, living in a converted storage room barely big enough for their mattresses. Her name was Margaret. She answered my knock looking exhausted, wearing that particular expression of women who've learned to expect nothing good from unexpected visitors. Mrs. Baker, confused, wary. I held out a box of angel cookies. For your children. Merry Christmas. Her face crumbled, just collapsed. She took the box with shaking hands, and her children crowded around, eyes wide with disbelief. A little girl picked up an angel cookie like it was made of gold, whispering, Mama, look at the wings. Margaret started crying. I haven't been able to give them anything for Christmas. I've been working double shifts at the laundry, but there's never enough, and She stopped, covering her mouth. Thank you. Oh, God. Thank you. I moved through the poor district, giving cookies away. Each gift broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Nativity sets to orphans at the church, who gathered around me like I was distributing miracles instead of butter and flour. Stars to families in boarding houses who handled the cookies with reverence. Snowflakes to elderly widows who cried saying they hadn't tasted butter in years. I'd spent 2 years calculating value in dollars. But the way that little girl held the angel cookie that was value, that was worth. That was the arithmetic I'd forgotten existed. Every cookie I gave away was a choice to fail differently. If I was going to lose everything, at least I'd lose it mattering to someone. The widow with 4 children looked like me. Would be me in a few days, homeless. Desperate. I was giving away my future, and somehow that felt less terrifying than holding on to it. A boy broke his star cookie into 3 pieces, sharing with his siblings, equal pieces, carefully measured. I watched him do my own arithmetic division instead of multiplication, sharing instead of hoarding. 7 years old, and he already understood what I was just learning. I kept thinking, Thomas would have understood this. The man I married before debt changed him. He used to say baking was about feeding people, not just selling to them. I'd lost that wisdom in surviving his failures. But standing in that poor district on Christmas morning, surrounded by joy I'd created accidentally, I finally understood what he'd meant. Samuel found me in the middle of it. He'd followed me somehow, carrying more baskets, helping distribute the last cookies. We didn't speak until everything was given away. Stood together in an empty street, my arms aching, my heart doing something complicated and painful and healing all at once. What if you served this community instead of the wealthy? He asked. The question landed different than when he'd asked before. Because now I understood. Now I'd seen children's faces. Now I'd watched Margaret cry over cookies her children would remember for the rest of their lives. I don't know how, I said honestly. We'll figure it out. We, the word hung between us. Not me alone, not him rescuing. I'd baked these cookies to save myself. Instead, I'd given myself away. Strange how that felt more like salvation. Samuel walked me home to face my empty kitchen and tomorrow's eviction. My arms ached from carrying baskets. My heart ached from something I didn't have words for yet. We didn't speak. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Inside, he finally explained his idea. Restructure your business for the poor district. Affordable prices. Bulk orders for churches and workers' families. Maybe teach baking skills to other widows who need work. Every part of me wanted to refuse. I started pacing, arguing more with myself than with him. I've managed alone for 2 years. Samuel, I don't need... I stopped. Tried again. What makes you think I can't handle this myself? I don't think that... Then why are you here? Why are you offering to... The word stuck. To help. He let me spiral. Sat at my table watching me pace. Patient as sunrise. Didn't interrupt. Didn't defend. Just waited for me to run out of words and reach the real fear underneath. Partnership sounded like failure disguised as wisdom. If I couldn't survive alone, what did that make me? Weak, incapable, everything. Thomas's failure had already accused me of being spent 2 years proving I could manage, that I was strong enough, that I didn't need anyone. But alone I'd lost everything. Alone I'd worked myself to bone and still couldn't pay rent. Alone I'd forgotten why I started baking in the first place. Maybe alone wasn't the virtue I'd convinced myself it was. Your wife died 3 years ago. I stopped pacing, faced him. You've managed alone since then. Why do you think I need saving? His answer changed everything. I don't think you need saving. Abigail. His voice was quiet, honest. I think you discovered something today about what you're meant to build. And I'm asking if you want a partner in building it. He paused. I've been alone 3 years because I was afraid too. The honesty undid me. We'd both been surviving, just separately. Him in his mercantile counting inventory, me in my kitchen counting cookies. Both of us measuring time in work that kept us too busy to feel. Both of us calling that survival and pretending it was enough. I'm afraid I'll fail, I said. You might. I might. We might fail together. He smiled, sad and small. But what you did today didn't feel like failure. It felt like, I searched for the word, freedom. There's your answer. I thought about my wedding to Thomas. We'd promised for better or worse. Got mostly worse. But we'd built the first bakery together, his business sense. My baking? Before debt drowned us. We'd been partners, not savior and saved. Partners. Could I do that again? Risk partnership when the last one had destroyed me? But Samuel wasn't Thomas. And I wasn't the young woman who'd believed in expansion dreams. We were both older, wounded, careful. Maybe that was better. Maybe broken things heal stronger if you're patient. If we're partners, I said slowly, I need to tell you something. I don't know how to do this. Trust someone. I'm terrified. Good. He smiled. Me too. Maybe we can be terrified together. The second coffee cup sat on my counter. I'd set it out without thinking. Old habits or new hope I didn't know anymore? Didn't care. Just knew that sitting across from Samuel felt less lonely than sitting alone. I need time to think, I said. He stood, headed for the door, paused. Take all the time you need. Abigail, I've waited 3 years. I can wait longer. After he left, I sat in my kitchen all night, wrestling with the choice that would define everything. Stay alone and fail, or accept partnership and try something different. Pride versus wisdom. Fear versus courage. Survival versus living. By dawn, I knew my answer. Not because partnership was safe, it wasn't, but because I'd spent 2 years choosing survival and it had saved nothing. Maybe it was time to choose something else. Maybe it was time to choose life. I found Samuel at his mercantile before dawn. He was doing inventory, counting flour sacks, his back to the door. I stood there watching him work, methodical, careful, patient, all the things I'd forgotten how to be. Yes, I said. He turned, surprised. Yes. To partnership, to trying something different, to building something that matters. The words came faster, not because I need rescuing, because you're right. I discovered something yesterday, and I don't want to do it alone. His face transformed, relief and joy, and something vulnerable I'd never seen before. Okay, good. We spent the day restructuring everything. Not him telling me what to do, not me accepting rescue. 2 people negotiating as equals, combining strengths, building something neither could alone. Samuel handled my landlord 3 months deferred rent in exchange for me supplying the boarding house with affordable cookies weekly. Business negotiation, not charity. I set the vision simple cookies working families could afford, bulk orders at prices churches could manage, teaching classes for widows needing marketable skills. As we talked, the real purpose emerged, crystallized. I knew 15 widowed women struggling exactly like I'd struggled. Margaret, with her 4 children. Elizabeth, who took in laundry. Rose, who cleaned houses. Women with no marketable skills beyond backbreaking labor that barely paid. If I taught them to bake, They could earn steady income, better income, income with dignity. Cooperative ownership. Samuel suggested the women you train become partners in a larger network. The idea terrified and exhilarated me, so much bigger than just survival. Building something that helped everyone who participated, not me successful while others struggled, but all of us rising together. What if I fail them? The fear slipped out. Like Thomas's expansion failed me, Samuel's answer was simple. The difference is, you're building with them. Not for them. And you're not alone this time. We worked through the afternoon. Calculated pricing that would sustain the business while staying affordable. Planned the teaching structure work-share for lessons, then co-ownership when ready. Designed a system that multiplied skill instead of hoarding it. I watched Samuel sketch business models, his careful handwriting next to mine, tools mingling, ideas building on each other. This was partnership. Not one person's vision imposed, but collaboration creating something neither had imagined alone. I'm still afraid, I said as evening approached. Good. He smiled. Fear means it matters. He asked, carefully, if he could court me properly now that business was settled. My heart did something complicated. Yes, but slowly. We're both too broken to rush. Broken things heal stronger if you're patient. He took my hand. The touch was conscious this time, intentional. I've got patience. We shook hands as partners first, then held them a moment longer as something more. Two widowed people choosing to build together. Choosing hope over survival, choosing life. I walked home that evening with a partner, a plan, and hope that terrified me. I'd spent 2 years choosing survival. This time, I chose something else. This time, I chose to live. 3 months later, I stood in my expanded kitchen teaching Margaret to fold butter into dough. 5 widows worked full-time in the baking cooperative. 20 more attended weekly classes, learning skills that would change their lives the way teaching them was changing mine. Gently, I told Margaret, guiding her hands, let the butter stay cold. That's what makes the layers. She nodded, concentrating. Her 4 children were in school for the first time we'd structured wages so women could afford childcare. Education instead of child labor. Future instead of just survival. Samuel appeared in the doorway with flower deliveries. We negotiated as equals now. He taught me business management. I taught him that profit wasn't the only measure of success. He was courting me properly flowers on Tuesdays, walks on Sunday afternoons, conversations that built slowly toward something neither of us was rushing. How's she doing? He asked, nodding at Margaret. She's brilliant. I watched Margaret's hands, seeing my own learning curve reflected. She'll be teaching others within 6 months. The cooperative had expanded into the building's empty shop space. We baked simple, sturdy cookies affordable to working families, special occasion cakes, communion bread for 3 churches. The women paid for lessons through workshare, then became co-owners when ready. Cooperation instead of competition. Multiplication instead of hoarding. Young widows came to me carrying the same desperation I'd worn like a second skin. I recognized the exhaustion, the fear, the pride that isolated. I taught them to fold butter into dough. But mostly, I taught them what sitting among 300 cookies had taught me. Sometimes what you build to survive must burn before you discover what you're meant to create. I told them. The woman I was 2 years ago, desperate, alone. Measuring survival in cookies sold wouldn't recognize what we'd built. But the woman who gave away 300 cookies on Christmas morning understood perfectly. I thought about Thomas sometimes without the sharp edge of grief or resentment. His expansion plans had failed because he built alone, borrowed beyond sustainability, chased wealth instead of purpose. What we were building now, cooperative, sustainable. Community-rooted honored what Thomas wanted to create but didn't know how. Samuel and I married quietly last month. His kitchen merged with mine not because either needed saving, but because two people who survived alone discovered they preferred building together. On Christmas mornings now, we bake 300 cookies and deliver them to the poor district together. The widows in the cooperative join us, teaching their children to give. The tradition that began in desperation becomes our purpose. The cookies save nothing and everything. They don't pay rent or erase debt. But they feed hungry children and remind struggling women that someone sees them, knows their worth, wants them to taste something beautiful. That's the arithmetic I understand now. Not survival, but purpose. Not perfection, but generosity. Not alone, but together. The widows I teach carry the same calculations I use to live by flour versus coal, hours versus dollars, sleep versus survival. I teach them different mathematics: cooperation versus competition, sustainability versus growth at any cost, community versus isolation. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Now I know strength means choosing partnership when pride tells you to refuse. This is the life we built from ashes and cookies and the courage to accept partnership when pride told me to refuse. This is what I learned sitting among 300 perfect cookies. Sometimes survival means letting go of what you thought you needed to become who you're meant to be. My hands guide Margaret's, teaching her what my grandmother taught me. The rolling pin passes between us heritage, skill, purpose. This is how communities heal. Not through grand gestures, but through butter folded into dough, through cookies shared, through women teaching women that they're worth more than survival. Samuel catches my eye across the kitchen, smiles. Two broken people who chose to heal together instead of hurt alone. I'd spent so long protecting my heart. I'd forgotten hearts were meant to be used,